The views and opinions expressed in the following program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of KSMQ Public Service Media Incorporated or its assigns.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Passingham, host of Garden Connections. On today's show, we're going to be heading to historic Forestville, and we're going to get a history lesson on what gardening was like in 1899. We also travel to Seed Savers Exchange near Decorah, Iowa. We head out into the orchard with Dan Bussey, and we're going to learn about apples. And Chef Stephen Larson is going to fix up some of those apples. He's going to make us an apple dumpling. Stay with us. Garden Connections is next. We're here at historic Forestville near Wyckoff, Minnesota, and we're going to get a little history lesson today. We're going to get that lesson from Sandy Scable. Thanks for being part of Garden Connections.
Well, thank you for having us.
This is a lovely site. Tell us a little bit about historic Forestville and how it's a little bit distinct from the state park that it happens to be located in.
Well, actually, historic Forestville came about in 1963 when the state park opened, and the Department of Natural Resources administered the historic site right along with the property of Thomas Meehan. The Meehan family has owned the property since settlement time. They started a general store and 2 generations lived here, and then the state acquired it in 1963 when the state park started.
Well, we are very interested in gardening and how that took place in that era. You have a couple of different types of gardens that you've told me about that a family or a community would have. Let's start with talking about the kitchen garden and why it was so named and the typical types of things that you would find in it.
The kitchen garden, most rural homes and even townhomes had kitchen gardens. It's where you would plant in the spring and harvest all summer long, and it was fresh produce. If you put yourself into the rural area in the year 1899 or earlier, you just couldn't hop in your car and run to town and visit the produce section. So if you wanted fresh vegetables, you had a kitchen garden, and it was a family affair. Everybody worked in the garden. They just didn't go out there and work in it. You were taught from early on to how to tend a garden, how to harvest a garden, how to seed a garden. And it was part of it sustained your family.
And how is that different than the winter garden that you indicated was typically further away from the home?
We know that the Meehans had a winter garden, and they were generally much larger. Not all rural homes had winter gardens, but I think a vast majority of them did. That's where your winter crops that you were going to lay over for the winter would be planted. They took more room, such as your vine crops, your melon, your squash, your cucumbers could be there, pumpkins, things that you would put up and store. Either you would dry them, you can then preserve them.
You mentioned that you have a wealth of information, resources from that era, letters and things that help you understand how life was like in that time. Would you read some for us?
Well, I'd love to. I'm going to start with this letter here from Janie McAndrews to Martha. Janie and Martha are sisters. They are Thomas Meehan's sisters. It goes something like this. Forestville, Minnesota, September 17th, 1880. Dear Sister Martha, Tom brought the mail from Preston last night, and among the rest was a letter which I was very glad to receive. As the mail leaves from Cresco today, I thought I could write a short letter. Must be short, for there is nothing strange or new to write about. He has a wife and 2 children. They are living in that house back of Henry Rinslow's. He takes breakfast and supper at home and only dinner with us. Sarah feels very happy because she has such near neighbors. The frost has killed our tomatoes and cucumbers. I bought about a dozen nice melons yesterday. Mother, Maria, and I had a big time eating them. It was the first we had this season, and we scarcely knew when we had eaten enough. Mother is planting flower seeds and making garden. Goodbye. Affectionately, Jenny.
Very nice. So they did have flowers as well as food. Gardens weren't only utilitarian.
Exactly. And we know that Catherine, one of the older sisters, and who was a spinster and never married, and it talks about Marie and Catherine were on a walk. Catherine was a lover of flowers, and she tended the flower beds here, as well as did a lot of the gardening and cooking in the home.
All right. Well, you have several people that help out here at the historic site that do interpretation for you. They dress in period costumes, and we're going to meet one of them here in just a little bit. And he's going to, I understand, demonstrate some of the methods and tools that were used in the garden in that time.
Sure, that would be great.
All right, stay with us. More Garden Connections is coming up next, but right now we're going to send you to the Seed Savers Exchange in Decorah, Iowa, where we catch up with Dan Bussey, who's going to take us out to the apple orchard. It's a beautiful fall day, and we're in one of my favorite places. We're at Seed Savers Exchange near Decorah, Iowa, and we are in the apple orchard. Now, you may remember last spring we got a lesson in grafting from Dan Bussey, who is the orchard manager here at Seed Savers. He's back with us again to tell us how the season went. Welcome back, Dan.
Thanks for being here.
So we saw you last in the spring when it was a little chilly.
A lot chilly.
And not many leaves out. Tell us, how did the apple season go this year?
This was a middling season. It was a tough winter, as everybody knows, and so some of the trees had some damage to the fruit buds and a little stress, but other than that, it was a really good year.
So in the orchard here, you have many varieties. Tell us a little bit about what makes this an historic orchard.
This is a very interesting orchard. The earliest apple from our collection dates to 450 AD. It's that variety.
You said 450
AD.
Okay.
It's a variety called Dacia. It came from Italy. There was a Roman general who was chasing Attila the Hun, and he liked carrying this apple with him because it traveled well. And so we have it here. If it's true, it's a very, very early apple.
Wow,
Most
that
of them
is just
do
amazing.
not date that early.
That is amazing.
Most of the apples we have here will be from the 1860s through the 1880s, pretty typically. We have some modern varieties as well, because we always like to keep up with what those are. But for the most part, everything here is very old. It's well over 100 years old.
Wow, that's amazing. And so is the mission of this, having this orchard, is it preservation of those historic varieties?
Absolutely. We're not worried so much about fruit production, but keeping these trees alive. We want to be a resource for people who are looking for these varieties to have a place to go. They know they can find them.
Now, when picking apples, you invite folks to come out to the orchard and you encourage them to take the windfall.
We prefer that they take the windfalls, but if you do know how to pick, and some people don't, and so it does make a difference.
Yep, and you're going to show us
I'm going
how
to show
pick.
you.
We've got a beautiful branch full of apples right here. And so what is the trick to picking the apple without damaging the tree?
One of two ways. You can either do it with two hands. You can grab the base of the stem and hold it, and then just flick the apple off, and it snaps just really nice.
And go up. Don't just yank.
Don't just
on
yank,
the branch,
because it'll tear off the bud, which will be your next year's fruit. There's what they call an abscission layer, and that's where it separates. And if it's the right time of the year, it'll just snap off really easy. I've noticed when I come in and after a weekend, the height of the apple layer seems to get higher and higher as the weeks go by, as people pick the short ones, and then I have to get to with a basket to pick the tall ones.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you're going to show us how that's done.
Yep.
All right, let's do it.
Sure.
So we've been collecting some apples here, and you're going to show us how to use this little basket. And let's take a look at this for a second. It's kind of an open basket.
Yep.
But it's got these little claws on it.
It usually has a pad inside, so when the apples fall and drop, they don't get dinged up in that.
Okay.
But it went somewhere. I have no idea.
All right. Sounds good. So we've got a branch way up high, and you're going to retrieve that guy.
Yep.
Great.
There.
Looks beautiful. That's a very nice color.
Yes, it is. This is a very pretty apple. This is Annie Elizabeth. This is an old English variety from about 1818. Actually, a little later than that, I'm sorry. But it can grow to be about twice this size. It's a gorgeous apple. I love using it in pies, and it's also good for fresh eating.
And beautiful. Just beautiful. Now, do you know all these trees by name?
Almost.
I was going to say, these just roll off your tongue so fast.
Yep.
So let's take a look at some of what we've got here. So point out the varieties to me, and then we're going to taste.
All right, this is Annie Elizabeth, that we just picked. This is a little bit more modern introduction. This is a Geneva crab. This is actually a crab apple.
Oh, really?
It dates to about 1930. It's
Am I
from
gonna expect
Canada.
that one to be kind of sour?
A little bit.
Maybe.
And this is probably the homeliest apple I've ever seen, but it has the most exquisite taste. almost any apple here.
And look at the, you know, it isn't the most attractive apple, and this is a normal part of the development of the apple.
Yep,
This is
exactly.
exactly what it's supposed to look like. There's nothing wrong with that fruit.
No, some people would say it's a cross between an apple and a potato, but it definitely is an apple. It's homely as it gets, but
Well,
it
I'm
is
dying
charmer.
to taste it. Let's give it a try.
Sure, exactly. Hold on to that. I'll get my knife here. We'll cut you a little slice. And it might be a little bit early in season.
And now, is this one that's going to improve with
Oh
storage?
yeah, this one is kind of a russet, so it has a very complex flavor to it, real rich, and so it's very unique. It's not everybody's cup of tea, and from the look on your eyes,
But
it
it's
might be a
good.
little on the tart side.
It is a little tart, but I like it. There's more to it than just tart. It doesn't make you pucker.
By mid-October, this will be really in its prime, and this is a wonderful apple.
Fantastic.
Yep.
All right, now let's take a look at this beauty.
This crab is descended from Malus pumila, which is a species of apple, variety called Nedwitskayana. It's a Russian, and it's a red-fleshed crab.
Oh.
Very unique. And when you cut it open, especially crossways, it has this beautiful color
look at
to it.
that. That's gorgeous.
Absolutely spectacular. I love using this. I make pies, and I will mix this with other varieties, and you have this beautiful red slice that is amongst the other ones, and it gives it really great color. This also adds a lot of really good color to cider.
Okay.
It's not the best eating apple. In fact, I wouldn't even think about eating it.
Oh,
but
really?
it's
So
a
we're
nice
not
one
gonna
for
taste it. Too tart?
cooking. You want to try it?
Let's be adventurous today.
There you go.
Okay. There really isn't much aroma with apples, is there?
There can be. They can be very perfumed. They go
Okay,
from
but this one's
absolutely
not.
no scent at all to being absolutely just, you can smell them as soon as you walk into a room.
Oh, that's not bad.
It
But
mellows
it's
up.
not flavorful like this one.
Not like that one at all.
You know, this one's beautiful to look at.
Yes,
but
it is.
This one tastes much better.
When you can walk through an orchard in this time of year and sample from tree to tree to tree, after about 15 you get burned out, seriously. But it's so much fun. You just can appreciate the difference, the way the flavors are, how juicy some are, how dry others are,
Right.
and just how wonderful it all is.
Oh, fantastic. We always learn so much when we visit with you. Thank you, Dan, so much.
Thank you so much.
All
You bet.
right. Stay with us. More Garden Connections is coming up next.
On Garden Connections, we'd love to see photos of your garden. Or if you have questions for our garden experts, contact us by emailing garden@ksmq.org or like us on Facebook.
We're back at historic Forestville, and we're going to learn a little bit about the tools and techniques used in these historic gardens. And our special guest now is Jake Stacken. Thanks for being part of Garden Connections.
You're welcome. Thank you for having
So
me.
you are one of the interpreters, and you are wearing the attire that a gentleman would wear in the garden, is that right?
Yes, I'm basically portraying a farmhand here at historic Forestville, and this is traditionally what I'd be wearing, specifically the high top boots.
Okay.
But then, of course, the hat to keep me from the long sleeves as well. They all work to keep the sun off of me.
Right. No sunscreen in those days, was there?
No, ma'am.
Not at all. All right. So let's talk a little bit about some of the tools that you've got here, and tell us, we're going to start planting to harvest. Is that right?
Yeah, we're going to kind of follow along those lines, although some of these tools are used for both.
Okay.
Or can be used in between and for both.
Okay. So we've got a shovel.
So we have a shovel. So in a small kitchen garden like this one here, often turning the soil over can be done simply with a spade. Stabbing it in the ground and turning it over. Perhaps every now and then they would bring the team of horses in here to turn over the kitchen garden here, but certainly not very often and only when necessary.
And then you've got another tool. Tell us a little bit about
so
this.
then we have our standard hose here. This one's a little bit more rigid than the others. This would also be used to work the soil up certainly hoe up weeds when it comes time to cultivating that soil. Some of
That's
them
pretty
are
heavy duty. I mean, that's really a large blade, it seems like.
This one is, but especially when you're out in our bigger garden with the 3 acres there, a heavier hoe certainly helps maintain your momentum and your energy. Especially if you're only getting out there once a month and the weeds have grown big.
Okay.
A bigger hoe makes a big difference. Another means of working up that soil, but also for cultivating, is this device here. This is a wheel hoe cultivator. You can see it's got a big wheel on it. And then these tines here can act to cultivate that soil, loosen up the dirt for seeding, or certainly scrape the small weeds as they come up and get them before they get big and crowding out the crops that you're trying to grow.
As well. And still just powered by pushing, so you had to have a little muscle behind that.
Exactly, a little muscle, although if your weeds are light, you're just trying to scrape that top layer of the soil, and that really helps to get those little weeds before they turn into big weeds, in which case you need to get the hose out, and that goes much slower.
Right.
So with this, you can just zip down the line,
Turn
zip
around,
down
come
the
back.
rows, and turn it over, and keep that soil nice and clean of those weeds.
Sounds great.
This is a planter, and you push it down the row, and it basically has adjustments down here for just about every type of seed you can think of. There's even stamped in on here onions, carrots, cabbage, turnips, all those things are all here, and you adjust that lever here based on how big the opening basically is to allow that seed to come in and out. Tighten that down where you want it. You can see this one even allows you to push that to the opening size that you want. Tighten that down, and then you simply move it along.
And the seed goes in the hopper here?
Yep, the seed goes up here in the hopper right there. Goes down an opening here. That's what I was adjusting there, is how big that opening was. And then it releases a single seed with every click.
And if you look at this,
wheel.
how ingenious. The click is based on these notches in the wheel.
That is right, yep.
Clever.
Exactly, and then it even covers up, this back wheel here serves to cover up that soil behind the seed there. Sometimes a chain would have been used. You can even still find these. Not as antiques, but brand new.
Brand new.
You buy them
that
to use in the
people still
garden.
plant in
They
those.
do make it go quite a bit easier than just hand planting.
Right. We talked a little bit about tools and some of the techniques of using those tools, but tell me a little bit about, in those days it was kind of pre-industrial agriculture. A lot of people are returning to organic production these days. In 1899, that's all you had.
That is.
You didn't have chemicals that you could spray or some of those techniques. Tell us, how did they manage pests and what did they do to improve the quality of the soil that they were depending on to grow this food for the winter?
So they already knew at that point the importance of soil fertility, and one of the things that they did on a regular basis was manure and lime the fields. Manure being simple barnyard manure.
They had the horses, that worked.
They had plenty of manure around. They would apply that to these gardens, to the fields, as soon as they had a big enough pile to put it out there. So that was an important thing to do. Liming is simply adding different types of minerals into the soil, specifically lime in that case. Also rotating the crops. Now in a small garden like this, you couldn't just necessarily move the garden over. You would often just rotate crops within that garden. But certainly in the fields, you're trying not to grow things there at the same
Repeating
year after year. Yep, and that was their biggest thing to keeping that soil lively, was to rotate crops, something they understood well already.
Okay, and how about pests? In some of the materials that Sandy had said they sent their kids out to pick bugs off of plants early in the morning.
Yep.
Is that, was that a kid's job?
Absolutely, yep. Getting those potato beetles off of the potatoes, or the squash bugs off the squash, was as simple as picking them up with your fingers, and if you had
if you weren't squeamish.
If you weren't squeamish, there we go,
squish
squishing them in your hands, maybe a bucket of water if you brought one with you, but kids those days were used to doing that types of things.
Yeah, very useful to have many children.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much for showing us these tools and demonstrating them for us.
You're welcome.
It's
It was
certainly
my
been
pleasure.
enlightening to us.
Great, thanks.
Stay with us. We'll be back with more Garden Connections, but we're going to send you to Chef Stephen Larson, who's going to make some apple dumplings for us. We'll be right back.
Welcome to the kitchen. Apples are one of my all-time favorite fruits, and I especially love them because they grow well around here. I'm using some Gala apples today, and this is a dessert that's really got kind of a nice homey feel to it. I call it an open face apple dumpling. We're going to make a bourbon caramel sauce to go along with that to give it a little bit of flair. But it is quite simple to do. We'll just get the apples ready as if we were making an apple pie or an apple crisp, any of those, which involves peeling, and then we need to do a dice with this. So we'll go through the top, cut them flat to start with, and we can lay them down. And we'll put the apples into a bowl, and to that bowl we're going to add 3 tablespoons of sugar, a teaspoon of cornstarch, whoops. That's going to help bind the juices, a half teaspoon of cinnamon, and just a couple of tablespoons of melted butter. Okay, we'll put that together in the bowl. Give that a good stir. Hopefully not too many of the apples will fly out on you. Okay, and we'll let that sit for just a minute while we put together our puff pastry. You could just certainly use something like a regular pie dough. That would also work, and it would be quite a bit simpler, I think, for most people. But you can also purchase puff pastry at the store. Or if you really, really want to get into things, you can make it yourself. Okay, puff pastry comes in 2 sheets per package. We just need 1 sheet for this recipe. We'll unfold that. Get rid of the paper. Lightly floured. Make sure that we're clear there. Flip it over, and then with a rolling pin, really we're just looking to flatten that out a touch. We don't really need to roll this out any further than it is. We just want to flatten these seams. That's most important. Right, now that we have it in the square shape, we're just going to take a sharp knife and cut that into 4. And we're going to take a fork and do what we call docking. This is docking the dough. We'll leave a little bit of a border around the edge so that can puff nicely, but what docking does to a dough is keep it from puffing up too far. If you don't do this, it can just sort of expand up and put your apples all over the pan and not stay in the tart pan. Okay, that's good for that. Little individual pie tins here. We'll just drape that inside. So this is kind of a rustic dessert. Now rustic doesn't mean sloppy, but rustic does mean simple, not terribly complicated or complex. We'll add our apples. Okay, that looks about even Stevens to me. Then for the last little bit, we'll take some additional melted butter and a brush and just dab around the edges. Okay, once that's done, into a 400-degree oven for about 18 to 20 minutes. All right, so my timer's just went off. It's been 20 minutes. We're going to take a peek at these apple dumplings. And, oh, they're beautiful. Okay, that's what we're looking for. Nice golden brown on the corners, good puffing, and they look beautiful. So we want a plate to put these on. Of course, these are going to be hot, so be careful when you handle them. Okay, so now we're going to pop these out of here You may need to loosen them a bit, but they should come out of there. Okay, onto the plate we go. And we're going to top with our caramel sauce. That's the sort of viscosity we're looking for there. And remember, this is still quite hot. So it's going to be lovely caramel. And of course, what would an apple dessert be without some whipped cream or ice cream if you want? So we'll just do that right in the middle. Nice, beautiful garnish. And there we have it. Baked apple dessert. Simple, homey, delicious. Share some joy. Bake something for somebody today.
Thanks for joining us today on Garden Connections. We've had a beautiful fall day here at historic Forestville and at the orchards at Seed Savers. I hope you've learned something and enjoyed the program. We look forward to seeing you next time on Garden Connections.